You're listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Welcome back to the Renegade Blitz. I'm Polk with Chris Ward, and we're glad to be with you as we're going to talk about the Steelers 2021 NFL Draft with our guest, Noah Strackbein, writer for All Steelers and the Sports Illustrated Network. Noah, glad to have you on the show.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm hyped.
Another Point Park guy in the building. It's always great to have Point Park Pioneers. I don't know the school saying for us, but yeah, go Point Park. Everyone's
Does
on.
Point Park have a saying? I don't know if they ever did. Do they have a song, anything?
They have an alma mater. They have a song. They have stuff like that. It's just that unless you're at the sporting events, no one really knows. And even then, we don't have a marching band at all. So it's all us just trying to figure out what we're doing. But regardless, Noah, we're glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk draft. I mean, it's Najee Harris season in Pittsburgh. I'm pretty hyped about it.
Yes, and he was the Steelers' first-round selection last week. It's the first time the Steelers have drafted a running back in the first round since Rashard Mendenhall in 2008. Many are still hung up on the idea of spending a first-rounder on a running back. What are your thoughts on this selection of Najee Harris?
I think Najee's the perfect fit. I think I've been saying that the whole time, and I feel like everybody else has too. I mean, Najee Harris is a guy, he's coming in. He can play immediately. He's already considered a guy who you should expect to hit 1,000 yards in year one. He could run behind most offensive lines, even if the Steelers line only gets a little better this season. He could catch. He's self-proclaimed a wide receiver. So you could throw him out of the backfield. Matt Canada could do a lot of creative stuff with them. I just think he fits everything the Steelers need right now. And if this is Ben Roethlisberger's last year, having a solid runner who could catch the ball out of the backfield is exactly what you want for a new quarterback.
And the one question that I have with this is also another thing. The second contract is what kind of got me a little bit gun shy towards the end. He will be 28, 29 years old, and those are typically the end times for running backs. Do you believe the situation with Ben, because I mentioned this in my draft report card, that potentially he could get that second contract, unlike most running backs in the Steelers organization, because they'll have that bridge quarterback or potentially the new franchise quarterback in the draft by the time it's time for him to talk contract?
Yeah, so, just like Mike Tomlin, it's hard to talk hypotheticals. But you look down the road, the Steelers could fifth-year option him, which is, kind of perfect for them, but it hurts Najee. And they're also probably going to talk to him a lot sooner than they do most of their rookies because of his age. He's a guy that he'll be talking to his agent towards, the 27, 28-year-old mark. And somebody's going to tell him, like, look, dude, you're probably not going to get the biggest contract on your next time around because you're older than most running backs and you have a shorter shelf life. So the Steelers offer him something in a pretty low ballpark, but to keep him around until he's 32, 33 years old. I mean, that's a stretch for running backs, but if he's that good for one, then you keep him around. And if he's a cheaper option, you don't pass up on a guy who could potentially be a Pro Bowler.
A lot of people are comparing Harris pre-draft process to Le'Veon Bell. Matt Forte was another name. Do you see some of those similarities, Harris?
Yeah, I definitely do. I actually think that he's a little better than those guys. When you look at Le'Veon Bell, and Le'Veon Bell has a great running style, but he works best behind a good offensive line. Najee Harris will run it right up the middle, jump over three people if need be. And also he could stiff arm a couple of guys on the way, and he's elusive enough to get away from defenders. So he's a guy that could run behind a beat up offensive line for right now, and hopefully they make it better. And he's a guy that could catch the ball as well, if not better than Le'Veon Bell. He could line up in the slot. He could probably line up outside. And he's a little bigger, which hopefully moves on or resembles that he could pass block pretty well as well. So if you're going to compare him to anybody, Le'Veon's a good one, but I think his expectations should be higher than what Le'Veon Bell did.
And the Steelers, they spent their second-round selection on Penn State tight end Pat Freiermuth. Many were expecting them to choose an offensive lineman, in particular Oklahoma's Creed Humphrey was out there. He's still available at the time. He's known for being Freiermuth is known for being a combo tight end in terms of blocking and receiving. Did you believe that tight end was a big need early for the Steelers, or did you want them to go elsewhere?
So at 55, or as it was like inching towards 55, I was talking to Donnie Droon, who's my deputy editor at allsteelers.com, and we're texting each other and we're like, they're definitely going Pat Freiermuth just because nobody's expecting Pat Freiermuth. And we weren't being really like realistic about it. We were joking around, and then they went with it, but it makes total sense. I mean, you have to look at it, and I've looked at the draft the whole time like this. You have to put your trust in some people this season. The Steelers have to trust guys who probably shouldn't be starters in the NFL. And the biggest four names are Chooks, BJ Finney, Benny Snell Jr., and Zach Gentry. So if you're going to put your faith in two people right from the jump, it's going to be Chooks and BJ Finney. So taking a guy like Pat Freiermuth, who could come in, replace Zach Gentry right now and be that number two. The Steelers love to run 12 personnel and then maybe take over Eric Ebron's job next season. Or you could keep Ebron around and have two solid tight ends moving forward. I mean, it makes perfect sense for the Steelers. When it comes to a center, I mean, it goes back to the trust thing. Who are you going to trust? Unfortunately, if you're going to put faith in BJ Finney over Zach Gentry, you're going to have to wait it out. I don't know if Kendrick Green's a starter right now, but I think he's a good enough option to say passing on Creed Humphreys was okay.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the tight end situation. I want to let you know that I'm not on the I hate Eric Ebron train. I actually think that he's done better than most tight ends really throughout my lifetime as a Steelers fan. And really, in terms of the production he had, he's the best tight end they've had since he retired. Mm-hmm. So I think the one thing that they needed was steady blocking. And even with that, that's still a kind of a question for Freiermuth, because he was so good as a receiving tight end out at Penn State that they effectively said, no, you're our number one. When do you think he could potentially take over that job? Like, do you have like a midway point, maybe towards the end of the season?
Yeah. So honestly, I look at a guy like Freiermuth as he's going to come in and probably play pretty much 40 to 50% of the snaps right from day one. He'll have like a Chase Claypool role at first, and then he'll work his way into probably playing more snaps than Eric Ebron by the end of the season. I wouldn't say that he's the starter. I don't think at any point this season you should expect Pat Freiermuth to be announced as a starter running out of the tunnel. I think that'll be Eric Ebron all season long. But Pat's going to get used more than Eric because he can block more. So they're going to want to keep him out there, distract defenses, so that you're not only putting Pat out there when you're going to run the ball, because he is a good pass catcher as well. So you put him out there. I think by the end of the season, he'll play somewhere around 56% to 60% of the snaps, while Eric Ebron's playing about 45 to 50.
I think the worry for guys like Freiermuth and, of course, Ebron is too many cooks. The Steelers still have four wide receivers that you want to have the ball in their hands. But the question is, of course, with the new personnel and situations, and there's been talks that Canada loves 12 personnel and really loves potentially 3 tight end sets. So Gentry or any other tight end on the market, if they want to give another shot to another Penn State product that's been yelled out through Steelers Twitter, Jesse James as well. The question is, sometimes I go, yeah, I could see 40, 50%. At other times, I could see 30, 20 potentially.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, I could see at times the Steelers. Do I see Jesse James coming back? No, not at this point. But I could see the Steelers trying to work Zach Gentry in and run 13 personnel. I don't think it makes a ton of sense, and I don't think they'll use it all the time because, for one, Zach Gentry is not a good blocker, so you're not benefiting at all, in the run game. And if you have guys like Chase Claypool and Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson, even Ray McLeod, you want to utilize those guys before you utilize Zach Gentry. I think that Matt Canada's offense this season is going to be more creative. Like, people are going to compare it to his days at Pitt and all his time in college, and I get that. And he probably will bring a lot of that with him, but I think he's going to bring some flash. He's going to be able to use Ray McLeod in creative ways. He's going to get Najee out in the slot a bunch, and he's going to let his offensive skill guys do most of the work, while Ben just kind of does what Ben does best and just throws the football and leads a team probably as good as anybody else.
Well, let's move on to the third round selection. You kind of touched on it a little bit, saying that you believe that maybe Green's not exactly starter material early on or potentially the entire season. But even with it, he's still been touted as the successor for Marquise Pouncey. And Green also could potentially play guard depending on what the Steelers want to do with the Castro in the future. And he's described as having a similar nasty streak to him that Kevin Dotson had as a 3rd-round pick in the previous year before. So I'll try to reroute this because I was asking a question about Green as a starter. Let's put it towards Clem's new philosophy for the offensive line. How do you see guys like Green and Dan Moore, who we'll talk about a little bit later, potentially changing up just the way that the Steelers' offensive line approaches the game?
So right now, I love the Steelers' offensive line and what they're doing, because essentially you look at it and they're going back to the days when they built the offensive line that they just, I don't want to say got rid of, but that just retired. Guys like Marquise Pouncey and Ramon Foster, Marcus Gilbert, they went out and got these guys, and it all started with Pouncey, obviously. And this time it all starts with Kevin Dotson. But it's just that mean guy, and then they'll get another mean guy. These guys that, maybe they need to be fine-tuned and they have, a couple flaws coming out of college, but they're guys that should step into roles and carry that demeanor to just play physical football. And that's what the Steelers love to do at offensive line. And that's exactly what Kendrick Green is. He's a guy that, you look at pictures of him, he looks like Marquise Pouncey. Like he's a guy that just looks nasty. He looks like a guy that'll just punch you in the face right on the field. And that's what the Steelers are looking for. When it comes to the new philosophy, that's what Adrian Clem's all about. He demands so much respect and he carries so much respect with him that, the guys around him are kind of soldiers. Like, that's how I look at a lot of this. Is Adrian Clem is a guy that's leading the most important people on the field right now, and a group of young guys that are learning to play NFL football. And he's demanding and giving as much respect as possible. And you need those mean, nasty, respectful guys up front. That's exactly what Kendrick Green is, excuse me.
We'll talk about Dan Moore a little bit later, but with them going with the offense tackle, waiting until the 4th round, they're pretty confident, it seems, in Zach Banner at right tackle, and it looks like Chuks Okorafor will be the left tackle. So I think those guys, a lot of people are going to be watching this year. They're going to have to step up big. Banner only started that one game last year in week 1 and fortunately suffered an ACL injury. And then Chuks Okorafor was at right tackle. And according to the rankings on Pro Football Focus and everything, they said he didn't do too well, especially down the stretch. But, the entire offensive line really didn't perform well. How confident are you in those two guys being starting tackles?
So it's a worry. And I think people are kind of overlooking Zach Banner and just kind of putting their confidence in him. And I have a lot of confidence in Zach Banner. I think he's going to be totally fine as a starting offensive tackle. And I kind of think Chuks is going to be totally fine this season too, especially if the line as a whole is a lot better than it was last season. Plus, you got to add in that Matt Canada's offense is probably not going to run as many RPOs, which is pretty tough on an offensive line. He's at times last season, we watched the same play get run 2-3 times in a row. That was Randy Fichtner's bread and butter. So you bring a new offense in there and the offensive line gets easier, which means that everybody gets better. I'd say there's still worries. I would, you could put as much faith as you want in Zach Banner to be a starting tackle. He still has to prove that he's a starting tackle. And same with Chuks, even though he was good enough to not lose his job to Matt Filer last season, because it was pretty easy to say Matt Filer should move to right tackle. Kevin Dotson should start at guard. I think by the end of the season, everybody was saying that, but he stuck it out and he was good enough to play all 16 games. So you have to put some faith in them. I think at the end of the day, it was a good move not to draft a tackle until the 4th round. But if these two guys, I have more faith in BJ Finney to be a consistent starter than Zach Banner and Chuks. And at the end of the day, they'll be the ones that determine how good this offensive line really is.
There was a poll question that floated around, had the 3 picks the Steelers chose versus the trio that was available at the time of their picks. And the order went Tevin Jenkins, Humphrey, and Trey Sermon. Of the picks, which trio would you rather have? And had your feelings changed since we got to know more about them?
So at the beginning, I would say that that's a good argument to go Tevin Jenkins and Creed Humphrey. I'm really not sold on Trey Sermon at all. But yeah, now that I looked into it, now that I know who Kendrick Green is, now that I know who Dan Moore is, now that I know much more about Pat Freiermuth than I did, I could say that, the way that they did this provides the best opportunity for them. They have a guy in Pat that can be versatile. And if you have 2 strong tight ends, for one, you could get the ball out quicker without running things like RPOs. And for 2, you have a solid run blocker in Pat Freiermuth. Najee's a steal at 24. I think Najee's a guy that I think all 3 of us sitting here right now, you guys might agree with me that Najee is a guy who I'm looking at as possibly going to be the rookie of the year. He just has that potential. So you obviously go with him. And then Creed Humphrey is the only big blow. He's a starter instantly. He's a guy that probably had first round potential. It's just how much faith do you have in BJ Finney and how much faith do you have in Kendrick Green? I think that I have enough in them, at least right now, or at least down the road, to say that I'm sticking with the guys that the Steelers have.
Yeah, a lot of the analytics people, like Pro Football Focus, like I mentioned earlier, Warren Sharp, in the pre-draft process, they were hammering it really hard. Don't go running back in the first round. And just still, like I've seen Pro Football Focus, they're still hammering the Steelers on the idea of.
I think that
the first round.
The issue with that, and I don't know why people aren't like looking at current years. Everybody's looking at past years, like, oh, Rashard Mendenhall. Everybody keeps comparing Najee Harris to Rashard Mendenhall. That's not the same at all. But like guys like Josh Jacobs, Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, they're all having great careers. They're all first round running backs. So like, why can't we compare Najee to those guys and not all these busts that everybody wants to put a label on,
Yeah, the one thing about Warren Sharp, he was also attacking the Steelers' backup quarterbacks. Meanwhile, the backup quarterbacks for the Steelers are over 500 as a whole. And you look at, not to get in a tangent about this guy, but I looked at the list and I'm like, okay, this guy was going to be like the backup to the backup, backup to the backup, backup to the backup, whatever. It's just that some of these national guys are just going a little too hard on the Steelers. And again, Green was one of those guys that Pro Football Focus liked. So, but also they said I remember hearing from some guys saying he was like 190 or something like that on their board.
Oh yeah. He was, a lot of people considered it to be a stretch. I didn't consider it to be a stretch. I think for the Steelers' needs, there was nobody else on the board that you were looking at and going, that's who we're going to pick in the third round. So a guy like Kendrick Green makes a lot of sense for what they were doing. I don't think it was a stretch, although people are going to label it like that.
Well, now let's move on to the fourth round, and the fourth round was the home to the Texas A&M Aggies for the Steelers, and we talked a little bit about it. Dan Moore, he's been shown to have some promise. There's been a couple guys that have really said that Dan Moore has above average technique. There was one guy that I mentioned in the report card on the RenegadeBlitz.com that really sung his praises and stuff like that. So Dan Moore, let's talk a little bit more about him. I like him because, of course, he was with Texas A&M in the SEC, but A&M still thinks they're in the Big 12 at times. They'll shoot it out all over the place. So just talk about this guy and just sell him on some of the Steelers fans that are still like, why did they choose a tackle in the fourth round?
So the fourth round comes back to, and I'm going to say it again, just who do you have trust with the most on the Steelers roster that you shouldn't have to put trust in? And at the end of the day, it's Chooks. Chooks is the guy that you're looking at. You're going, he was a third round pick. He's got good potential. He didn't kill us last season. And if you got to put him in at left tackle to start the year, totally fine. Do I see Dan Moore replacing him at some point this season? Probably not. But I think Dan Moore has enough potential down the road to be the starter long-term. He's a guy he's a quality run blocker. Yeah, he's got some issues when it comes to pass blocking and stuff like that. He reaches from time to time, but those are things that you could fine tune in the NFL. He works out with Kendrick Green, which is awesome. That's a great, chemistry to bring into the locker room. And Adrian Clem described them both as nasty. He said that Dan Moore, and I'll tell you this, you could feel the attitude that Kendrick Green brings when you speak to him. When you talk to Dan Moore, he addresses everybody by their first name. He says, thank you. As soon as you congratulate him, he says he appreciates you. Kendrick Green he was Marquise Pouncey. This guy was a Ramon Foster. And that's awesome to see, because that's who you're looking for, to kind of balance out that offensive line. But at the same time, Adrian Clem says once he gets on the field, he's just like Kendrick. And that's exactly what the Steelers are looking for. He just fits the mold of what they're doing. And Chooks is a guy that could come in here and start and play quality football. So put some faith in him and let Dan Moore prove himself down the road. You got to remember, Chooks is on a contract year this season, and chances are they don't pick it up next year.
Yeah, Daniel Jeremiah said with the tackle class being so deep this year, in some other years, Moore would have been a second round type of guy. So I thought that was encouraging to see. And this tackle class was really deep. I mean, there was numerous tackles that were just flying off the board there in the second and third round.
Yeah, it was a class that, I mean, and at the end of the first round, there was obviously options still there, like pretty good first round options at tackle, but we kind of all got the sense that it didn't make sense to draft a tackle at that point. And even in the second round, you looked at it and went, there's still a lot of guys out here that maybe we could take a pick on. That's why everybody was saying Creed Humphrey over, some of the tackles that were still on the board.
And then the other fourth round pick and Texas A&M Aggie, Buddy Johnson. He was a tackling machine at Texas A&M, racking up 209 total tackles in his college career. I think in his rookie year, Johnson will be a special teams demon, I think. And then eventually down the road can possibly be paired with Devin Bush as a starting inside linebacker. But what did you think of the Steelers selecting Johnson with their second pick in the fourth round? I saw some Steelers fans mentioning that they wish they addressed cornerback at that point. Did you like the pick?
Yeah, I like the pick a lot. I wasn't a guy that said the Steelers should a cornerback maybe, but I still thought there was a lot on the board. I did like Buddy Johnson, though. Buddy Johnson is a guy, like you said, who could come in here and play special teams immediately. He's super athletic, and that's what Jerry Orlovsky, the inside linebackers coach, kept talking about him. For one, he had no idea that Buddy Johnson led the SEC in tackles last season, which is huge considering you're tackling guys like Najee Harris and Devontae Smith all the time. And he said that the thing that stood out about him most is that he has so many physical traits that you cannot teach in the NFL. Like how athletic he actually is he kept saying it was scary. He's a guy that he has to fine tune his pass coverage, which is totally fine because you could use the first year or two to do that. He's going to play behind Vince Williams, who is, if you're going to learn from anybody in Pittsburgh, one of the best people to learn from is Vince Williams. And the Steelers special teams got so much better with the addition of guys like Buddy Johnson, Quincy Rochet, even, Isaiah Loudermilk, if you believe he's going to do much on special teams. But all these quick athletic guys, young guys, the special teams got huge. Buddy Johnson's going to be a contributor day one. Honestly, that's my favorite pick in this draft is Buddy Johnson.
And he's one of the faster linebackers in the entire draft. His shuttle times were great. His 40 time was great. I believe he rounded up somewhere in the top 5 for all of those things. So speed's going to kill for the Steelers, and it's going to be a great thing to see over the years if Devin Bush on one side, Buddy Johnson on the other, potentially just playing zone, and while you have the edges and Watt and hopefully Highsmith or whoever else of these guys coming through and just saying, we don't have to drop back into coverage. We're just going to go get your quarterback.
Yeah, it's awesome. The Steelers, the depth on defense right now is so nice. Quincy Rochet, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is a guy that could come in here and contribute right away behind Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt. And then you have obviously 3 or 4 inside linebackers depending on how much trust you have in Marcus Allen. You added some quality cornerbacks. The depth all throughout the defense right now is pretty fantastic.
And Loudermilk, he's considered a project. He was third team Big Ten, and that's always a pretty nice thing to have in a conference like that. But really, pretty much huge. And there's been, I think you said that Green looked like a younger Marquise Pouncey. Loudermilk looks like Cam Hayward, and at 6'8", 297, it seems that he's prime potentially after. If Tyson Alulu decides to retire, it seems like he could be in the running for the nose tackle spot and potentially push out one of Carlos Davis and Isaiah Buggs potentially over time.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I think that Isaiah Loudermilk, obviously, I don't understand why trading into the 5th round was the move to come up and draft him. Apparently, they felt that he wouldn't have lasted till their 6th round pick. And honestly, I think that they believe to some degree that they would have been able to grab Quincy Rochet in the 6th round, so they wouldn't have gone Isaiah Loudermilk. But anyways, he's a guy that could come in here. I don't think they have a lot of faith in Carlos Davis. I really don't think they have a lot of faith in Isaiah Buggs. So they want a guy that could come in and be a solid contributor behind Tyson Alulu, Cam Hayward, and Stephon Tuitt. Obviously, Isaiah Loudermilk could play all 3 spots, which is awesome. And dude, anybody who's 6'8" could be a great kick blocker right in the middle of that defensive line. So immediately you're thinking that. This is just a guy that has a lot of upside. He's a project. I don't know if he's a trade-up situation, but he's here, and I think the Steelers got a pretty good pick for the 5th round, in my opinion.
Kevin Kohler mentioned in the post-draft press conference that they thought they would get like a compensatory pick around like the 4th round. And did you see the projections that came out a couple of days ago? I guess they're projected to get a 3rd and a 5th.
Yeah. So a 3rd for Bud Dupree, which is huge. A 5th that could easily turn into a 4th. You can never look at that and say that that's solid, because everything always switches by next year.
So the 5th one could turn into a 4th.
Yeah, so could the 3rd at that point. I mean,
okay.
It's like it's a formula, but until they give you an exact number, it's a little early for all that stuff. Last year or this past season, I believe the Steelers were expected to get 2 4th round picks, comp picks, and they only got 1. So it's just just something that you have to wait on. But either way, if they could get a 3rd, even if they could get a 4th, I think the Isaiah Loudermilk trade is just you even if you don't agree with it, that argument goes right out the door, because they didn't waste anything on it. You know what I mean?
That's one thing I wanted to talk about. It felt like that trade for the opportunity to select Loudermilk was because they had all those compensatory picks. Yeah.
It was just a move that they knew long term they weren't going to lose anything in it. I mean, they didn't give up anything. They gave up a 4th round pick next year. If they get one back, it's basically they gave up nothing for Isaiah Loudermilk.
And then with the 6th round pick, Quincy Rochet, I was surprised that he lasted that long. Just looking at his production in college at both Temple and Miami, he had a lot of tackles for losses and sacks. What have you seen from Rochet on highlights or film, and what have you been hearing as far as his potential with the Steelers this year?
So the Steelers looked at Quincy Rochet as a 3rd round pick. They thought he was going to be gone in the 3rd round. When he lasted to the 6th, they were shocked. I think everybody else was shocked. I don't know if it's just because edge rusher was pretty deep in this draft, but the Steelers got a guy that he doesn't need much to be an NFL player. I mean, he's not a starter. He's not a guy that's going to compete and beat out Alex Highsmith, but he's a guy that's going to come in and can play the edge. He's a defensive end who's going to switch to outside linebacker, and the Steelers love that. And he could play both sides. He's athletic enough to beat people off the edge, to beat tackles off the edge. He's strong enough to get inside, and his production, I get it, Miami was low, but still 4.5 sacks to be in a mix of defensive ends is pretty good. And 26 sacks at Temple is phenomenal. So he's a guy for the 6th round, he's a steal. And for year 1, I would totally expect to see him at least play 15-20% of the snaps on defense.
And the 7th round pick was Oklahoma cornerback safety Trey Norwood. And let me tell you this right now, I'm really intrigued with this guy because he was a ball hawk in the most pass-happy conference in the entire country. 5 interceptions, tied for the top of the Big 12 lead. This guy, I think that a lot of Steelers fans are going a safety over a corner, but this guy could potentially be another one of those slot corners for the Steelers.
Yeah, so Trey Norwood's a guy who he said, for one, that if he had to pinpoint a position that he'd play, it'd be slot corner, which is cool. The Steelers need a slot corner. I do think he fits more of a safety mold, but realistically, he's exactly what Mike Tomlin introduced him as. He's a Swiss Army knife. He's a guy that the Steelers want to come in and be the new Cam Sutton and play all over the field, play every position. Maybe he's not the next Mike Hilton, but if he could be Sutton and play the role that Sutton played, even if it's to a lesser degree, that's exactly what the Steelers need, because they love that depth behind Terrell Edmunds and Minkah Fitzpatrick, and a guy who could play on the inside, when Cam Sutton can't, or say one of these guys like Shakur Brown or Lamont Wade come in here, make the team, and they play nickel. Trey Norwood is a guy that could move down, replace them. He could just play all over the field, and that's exactly what the Steelers were looking for.
And then the Steelers, their final pick in the 2021 NFL draft was Georgia Tech punter Presley Harvin III. Seeing some of his highlights, some of the fakes he did. He threw a long touchdown pass on a fake punt. Really good punter at Georgia Tech. He won the Ray Guy Award last year. Anytime the NFL team selects a punter, or puts a draft pick out there, or selects one in the draft, that's saying a lot too. So, what are your thoughts on Harvin being selected in the 7th round? And it looks like he'll give Barry a lot of competition there in training camp.
Yeah. So first, I'm going to ask: are you guys fans of Jordan Berry? Do you think Jordan Berry
No.
I mean, he's not a,
No, nobody's a fan of Jordan
he got
Berry.
replaced by the ghost of Dustin Colquitt.
Exactly. The Steelers, that's exactly where I was going. The Steelers tried so hard to get rid of Jordan Berry, and it was a failed attempt. It is what it is. Corliss Waitman, people thought was it. I thought it was it. Didn't happen. You don't bring in a guy, you don't use a 7th round pick on a punter and not make him your new punter. Jordan Berry's time in Pittsburgh is done. I love Harvin. I mean, the dude squats 700 pounds. That's something fans can get fired up about.
We're burying the lead here, though. Black punter. The first black punter to win the Ray Guy Award. That is officially it. I've been clamoring for Marquette King, and we got something that's arguably even better. I'm happy. Grades an A.
God, you love it. It's a fantastic pick. And he's probably going to sell more jerseys than any other rookie outside of Najee Harris in year 1. I bet you he sells more punter jerseys than any punter to ever play football.
Yeah, Steeler fans, he looks like he'll become a fan favorite. And you're right. I think Jordan Berry's, for them to spend a 7th round pick on a punter says a lot.
Oh, it says so. I mean, there's so many punters that are available every single season to replace Jordan Berry. It wouldn't take much to do it. They went out and got the most exciting one available. And people in the 5th round, I mean, I thought Loudermilk was the jersey to buy. No way. Especially if he gets Harvin the 3rd, it's over. You better go out and buy a Harvin jersey day 1.
Man. And there's also one more thing. That's the first punter the Steelers have selected since Daniel Sepulveda. So the hope is that this guy doesn't get injured, because it would just be an absolute shame. But the second I seen this guy, I was like, all right, thanks, Jordan Berry, but see you.
Yep, time's done. Do you guys know that Jordan Berry, I mean, realistically, Jordan Berry's only around because he wasn't married early enough, and the Steelers had to basically give him a job so he could keep his green card. Because he was caught a couple years ago and was deported to Australia the week before his wedding. And the Steelers were like, okay, well, we can't let that happen. So they signed him again so he could bring him back. That was attempt 1 to get rid of Jordan Berry. Attempt 2 was Dustin Colquitt's ghost.
That's honestly the most amazing story ever, and that feels like it should be like a rom-com movie plot, but that's neither here nor there. So we're finished with the NFL draft, at least in terms of the draft picks. But of course, you mentioned that the Steelers did make a lot of hay on the undrafted free agent front, and there's 2 guys that kind of top the list. One, Lamont Wade, because he's a local guy from Clarendon, also went to Penn State, and also Shakur Brown, who, it's strange, he had a 3rd round grade on the Steelers board and most boards out there, but he went undrafted, and he was one of the better cornerbacks, I think one of the tops in terms of some position grade for Big Ten corners. So it's going to be interesting. And of course, with the logjam, at least for a battle at slot corner, where do you see these guys going?
So I think that Wade and Brown are the 2 guys that I would pick to make the roster if I was going to pick any. Shakur Brown, I had him mocked to the Steelers in the 4th round, and I was shocked. I didn't even realize that he didn't get drafted until the Steelers signed him, and I was like, I can't believe he was still on the board. Lamont Wade is a guy who could come in here and be exciting, but I think that the fact that he's local is more exciting than his actual play on the field. He has a lot of work to do. He's not really the surest tackler. People keep trying to compare him to Mike Hilton because their college statistics are pretty much the same. But you look at him and you just don't see a guy who's going to come in here and be a superstar day 1. Shakur Brown is a guy who could be. I mean, he's an inside guy. He always plays on the inside. He could bounce out if needed, but he's a thicker body who's got pretty good athleticism, and the Steelers need an inside corner. So I think if I had to pick anybody to make the team, it's him.
Yeah, Ty, Shakur Brown, he went to Woodland Hills also.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that. See, so local.
I heard people talk about it on Twitter, and then I just looked it up now just to see if it was true, and it does say he went to Woodland Hills.
Wow.
But I knew about Lamont Wade. Yeah, they got mostly defensive players for as far as undrafted free agents. I think they had 2 offensive players. They're both receivers.
Yeah, they needed. I mean, the Steelers didn't really need a wide receiver. They're probably practice squad guys, which is good. The Steelers need practice squad receivers, but defense, I mean, they still needed to find an inside cornerback. So at this point, just grabbing a bunch of them and see what one's the best is your best option. Linebacker, obviously a guy who could come in here and just play anywhere they need him to on a practice squad defense. They all make sense. All the signings do. Another name to watch is Donovan Steiner out of Florida. He's a bigger guy. He's tall. He's more athletic, and he has a pretty high football IQ back there at safety. He's a guy that could come in here and make some noise during training camp. And he's a guy that I think could surprise a lot of people.
Then coming down here to the last couple questions, but do you have a favorite pick from the Steelers draft class? And was there a selection that you disagreed with?
I don't know if I disagree with any. I think trading up for Isaiah Loudermilk was real weird. I guess it does make sense when you look at the grand scheme of things, but in the moment I was just like, that doesn't make any sense, especially with the corners that were still on the board. If they traded up and got Shaun Wade, I would have been like, that makes a lot of sense. But it just showed me that they don't have faith in Carlos Davis or Isaiah Buggs right now. My favorite pick, I think long-term, my favorite pick will be Buddy Johnson. He's a guy that I think is going to come in here and be right next to Devin Bush next season, not this upcoming season, but the year after. And I think those two together are going to be dominant. They're going to be two Ryan Shaziers lined up right next to each other in a couple of years, which is fantastic. But my favorite pick for right now, outside of Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth, obviously, is Quincy Rochet. He's a guy I think he's going to have no trouble making the roster. He's going to have no trouble contributing in year one. He's basically stepping into Alex Highsmith's role from last season. The Steelers needed that. And, at a week ago, we were banking on Cassius Marsh, which I did not feel good about.
I mean, he's got a nice trading card company out in California. That counts for something.
You look at Cassius Marsh and you're like, that's a dude who should be crazy good at football. And he probably is, but I don't want to put my faith in him.
I'm pretty sure if we probably had this podcast on a little bit earlier before September 2020, we probably would have been saying the same thing about Tyson Alulu, who was a nice depth piece, but you never know until you put a guy out there in a situation. And that's what we could all find out in mini camps and training camps for the Steelers. So my last question is, I graded this draft class a B on the RenegadeBlitz.com. What would you grade this one out for the Steelers?
I think a B is a pretty fair assessment. There's a lot of guys. I don't think they're any lower than a B. And I think that some picks like Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth are closer to A's than anything else. People could bash on Pat Freiermuth all they want, but the Steelers need two tight ends, and everything that they did, it game plan for now what Ben Roethlisberger loves to have, but it also gave maybe Mason Rudolph or Dwayne Haskins a much easier transition into a starting role next season. I would say overall B is pretty perfect. They have guys that need development, and Kendrick Green and Dan Moore, that in positions that they should have filled with starters and they didn't. They didn't get a cornerback that we know much about right now. And, overall, they still have some holes. But if all the talent clicks, and especially down the road, once it all does click, this draft class can be pretty great.
Yeah, for me, the top three picks, I gave Harris an A off of just sheer need and the horrible draft history, just guaranteeing the top pick for at least the running back position. Mm-hmm. I gave Freiermuth a B because while his potential and what he can do and what he is as a player is what the Steelers need, a dependable return to dependability at tight end. But my question again was with the wide receiver group is how much I know that they run 12 personnel, and that's the thing that the Steelers do, but how much aside from run blocking, and even that's a little bit of a question, but with his deployment at Penn State, how much can he contribute like right now? I know that if they decide to let Ebron walk after this year, then that production will automatically go up. It's just like in terms of right now, and then potentially if the Steelers decide to go get another tight end, because it's not going to be Zach Gentry alongside this guy. It's going to be someone else, and it may be another tight end in the draft, or potentially a guy they sign off the street somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, next season it opens up the door for Eric Ebron to return and those two to just click perfectly, and that's what we're looking at. Or, they could go out and get a guy that's a little older to play below Pat Freiermuth and sign a pretty decent deal. So, I mean, it gives them a lot of options.
And Green was given an A off of potential more than anything else and a need, but that kind of ends everything that I thought of, at least with those top three guys. Chris, what was your thoughts, at least, on the top three?
Top three? I liked the Harris pick. I thought that was what they needed to do. They drafted a bunch of mid-round running backs the 4 previous drafts, and they really didn't get Connor was okay, and then the rest were just, you're looking at Benny Snell Jr. as possibly the RB1 if they didn't get Harris, because they weren't going to get, Travis Etienne went right after Harris, and then Javonte Williams was early in the second round too. But I like Freiermuth. I think he's gonna. They needed a dress tight end because Ebron was. They needed a blocking tight end. And then as far as the third round pick, I like Kendrick Green too. I think, like Noah mentioned, he reminds me of Pouncey as far as his demeanor. Their size, their build, it's different. But I thought it was good. I mean, I was a little surprised that they went tight end in the second round because Creed Humphrey could have been like a plug and play starter, and we still don't know if we'll have to see if Kendrick Green could be a starter right away. But I thought they filled all their needs that they needed to.
Well, while I still have you here, now that it's kind of like a big story in Steelers land, Noah, I also want to get your take on this. Alejandro Villanueva signed a 2-year contract with the Baltimore Ravens, and at least depending on how you feel about his press conference, in the city of bridges, he burned a lot of bridges with a lot of his comments about, Steelers, ancillary comments about social media use, and also the way that the Steelers' offensive line is deployed in terms of Ben Roethlisberger's, last dance is as a quarterback. And I just want to get your take on that press conference and also the move for the Ravens.
For the Ravens, I don't think the move makes any sense. I got pretty eaten alive by Ravens fans this week by, sharing that thought. But the Ravens are a team that you could say whatever you want about how they're trying real hard to build a pass game. Until they have a pass game, Al Villanueva makes no sense in that offensive scheme. Lamar Jackson's a guy who I love. Lamar Jackson. He's got all the potential in the world to be a pocket passer, but he's a run first guy. That offense is built to run first. And Al Villanueva is not good at run blocking. He lost that ability 2 years ago, and it's just been declining since. So it makes no sense schematically. When he said that he wanted to play the Steelers twice a year and that was motivation, I don't know anybody who wants to play TJ Watt twice a year. I don't know anybody in the NFL, so it makes no sense for a guy who's 32 years old, who's about to switch sides of the line and have to run block against TJ Watt. So that one was rough. And then obviously Juju Smith-Schuster, you could say he was joking. You could say he wasn't joking. My problem with Al Villanueva with all this stuff, and obviously Al Villanueva is a hero to this country. He's a phenomenal football player. He's had a great career. He's done a lot for the Steelers. But every time something like this happens, like the Chicago tunnel and the Alwyn Cash name on the back of his helmet, he leaves it up for everybody to get super mad at him. And then a week later or a month later, he'll explain himself, just like he'll do this time. In 3 months, he'll talk about how he was joking about the TikTok thing. But for right now, he's going to let everybody in Pittsburgh blow up on him. Everybody in Baltimore try to defend him. And he's just going to sit back on his flip phone and not know anything's going on, because that's what he does all the time. He sets these fires and he leaves. And that's exactly what he did this time.
He says he only has a flip phone, but he was a part of a video conference, so he has a laptop. He is seeing this somewhere.
No, Al Villanueva is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. I know for a fact this man goes home every night and just studies something crazy on that little laptop in his room, probably.
It seems like a trend with Villanueva where he somehow catches himself. He doesn't he only talked to the media a couple times this past year, right?
Yeah, after the Alwyn Cash thing, he didn't speak to us for a whole week. For a whole week, I was like, "What did you do? Who is this guy?" He made everybody else tell the story when if he said it after the game, everything's fixed and we don't have to worry about any of it.
And he had that weird article that kind of looked like he was kind of sort of retiring, and then out of nowhere, Spot Track gives him $16 million on the open market, which obviously I don't think he was ever in consideration for $16 million a year, but I guess that's why he got a job somewhere, and I'm happy for him. But I thought he was retiring. It seemed like, I'm pretty sure you remember this article. It was from the Post-Gazette. It seemed like he was going to retire. And I was like, all right, so basically the entire offensive line is gone. So let's go get someone in a draft. Do you think the same way?
I did think that at a point during the season, it sounded like Al Villanueva was on his way out. By the end of the year, I think that he knew he was going to get money. I thought he believed he was going to get more money than he got. I think once the market crashed, he was a little shocked, but so was Juju, obviously. He clearly wasn't worth $14 million or $15 million. If a team gave him that, that's crazy.
Well, regardless, hey, congratulations, Al. Continue getting them checks, continue getting paid, and who knows, maybe the Ravens thought you could still carry off that old, you know how it is with the service academies. They're good with options. Lamar Jackson likes to run the option. Why not? But anyway, that's Noah Strackbein, writer for All Steelers and the Sports Illustrated Network. And Noah, tell us where you can find your social media and your articles.
Yeah, so obviously, thank you guys for having me on. It's been a blast. Love talking draft with you. You guys can find me at Noah Strack on Twitter, at SI Steelers on Twitter, and then you can find all my work at allsteelers.com.
Absolutely. And always, we support anyone going out there from Point Park. So again, Noah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Like I said, it's been a blast.
All right, and so that'll do it for us. For Chris Ward, I'm Ty Polk. Thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Our podcast is available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeart, and Spotify.